Royal Rumble 2 days later to Roddy Piper. And so that all came. Matt, that whole thing, that transition to get the belt on Roddy, I mean, was that necessary, Matt? Do you think that made it all the more special, the fact that he had to win the belt, or could they have played it where Bret is the champion and he's up against Roddy? Would that not have had the same effect for you? Was it worth doing that sort of transition that they did there, Matt?
No, I don't mind that too much. I mean, I like the fact that you get Bret coming in as the underdog because it going in as the face, you want him to win. I mean, even like Roddy coming in the way that he does, he's still going to have fans because of just the way he's so outspoken and the charisma that he has. You got to do something there to get Bret on the right side of the fans. Sure.
Well, the Royal Rumble match itself with Roddy Piper beating the Mountie to win the Intercontinental title with a sleeper in 5 minutes 18 seconds. So wasn't a long match either, and didn't score too high. But yeah, it was literally all about that. But obviously Bret did not feature on that Royal Rumble. They kept to the storyline. Matt, it's interesting. Of all the things to come up with, you don't really hear about fevers being one of them, do you? It's always like something tremendously worse than that these days. But it seems like they've done a more of a sort of half shoot type thing there. Like they've done a pretty decent job. They wouldn't have Bret involved like that night for the title and all the rest of it, or any other match. It seems like they've done a really good sort of serious angle there to get that over to the fans, that the fact that the Mountie beat him was literally because he was that ill. I guess I know that Meltzer obviously didn't buy it, but I definitely bought it at the time because I remember screaming at the telly at the Mountie because I flipping hated him for it. But obviously 2 days later that wasn't the case. And I guess the other interesting thing here, Matt, about all this is that Roddy Piper is a babyface, and this has got to be. I didn't really think about it until now, but I just thought about it. And I thought, this is one of the few times where babyface is going to face babyface, Matt, for this title. Normally you got to have this crazy angle, and I guess most people would have suspected it'll be the Mountie and Bret feuding, and it's sort of for his revenge. But they went with this whole thing about babyface, and I guess that was a different angle as well at the time for WWF to use about all this, because normally it was always typical babyface versus heel around this sort of era, Matt.
Yeah, and it still pretty much is the commonplace. But it is one of those situations where it is kind of so rare that when it does happen, you definitely have to be there to see it happen and tune in. So I think that it works so well between these two guys because although, one's so outspoken and one's so, generically, the babyface, I think it's definitely going to go down well with the fans because you feel like you might only see it the once when it happens.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. Okay, well, I want to move ahead here. The Piper versus Hart IC title match will wind up with neither man being turned. It was set up on television in syndication, not on Fox, with Hart versus Mountie match, which ended up with the Nasty Boys interfering, with Piper making the save for Hart. A few friendly challenges later ended up with the match of the babyface match, originally scheduled LOD versus the Beverly Brothers match on Fox, was switched to Jim Duggan and Sergeant Slaughter beating the Beverly Brothers because Hulk was and still is out of action with a hip pointer. So it's a little interesting fact what was going on there. Fun fact in February here of 92, Meltzer says, I was very disappointed with how they handled the switch from Hogan Flair match to Hogan Justice with simply an announcement by Jack Tunney, which really made no sense. Matt, we touched on the whole Ric Flair signing earlier. Again, I don't know when we'll talk about this. I'm sure we may talk about this at other times, but the fact that this match, we're in February 24th when that was announced, Matt. Not exactly, a lot of time here to go with something else. And it was a big disappointment, I think, for a lot of people that we weren't going to get Flair and Hogan. And there's lots of different reasons as to why, whether it was, either one of them didn't want a job for the other, or was it the matches just weren't living up to expectation on the house shows. The fact that it was this late, Matt, what a late call that is, February 24th, to suddenly go with Hogan, Justice and Flair and Macho Man. And again, how we may have looked back at WrestleMania 8 very differently, Matt, if that had, of course, taken place. But your thoughts on that, Matt, that we didn't get it and how late that all came about?
Well, I do like one of the matches, Macho Man versus Flair.
Yeah.
That one, I'll always look back on fondly. That it was pretty good. But, I think it could have definitely gone down in the history books a lot better if it was, if it was Hogan versus Ric Flair. I mean, that's still a match that never happened in WWE, and definitely will be one of those ones that people kind of think, why did it never happen?
Yeah. Okay, another tapings here. The 14th of the 2nd here in St. Louis. Bret Hart beats the Mountie, and Meltzer says this was the best match on the card, and it was all down to Bret Hart. So even here, Matt, early signs are that Bret can literally pull out the best matches, even against somebody like the Mountie in that kind of crazy gimmick. Obviously, Rougeau was a great wrestler, but when you're having to play this gimmick, it's slightly harsh on him that, he's got to try and play a different way. Fun facts here, the Ultimate Warrior Slim Jim commercial, which has just started airing, was apparently filmed around 18 months ago when he was still with the WWF. That's interesting, Matt, because obviously what happens at WrestleMania 8 at the end of it, that they would air that. And of course, even if it was filmed that far ago, I don't think Vince would have just allowed the Slim Jim advert to appear with Ultimate Warrior if he didn't think that maybe they were going to work together again after what happened at SummerSlam. But interesting pointer there. And the Wrestling Challenge taping, Roddy Piper did an interview and said he didn't want to wrestle Bret Hart because he's been friends with Stu Hart, and Bret came out and they wound up shaking hands. So the feud that these two guys are having, it's like a respect kind of thing, and it's all about, I guess, trying to do it that way without the traditional, bad habits. I think maybe a lot of people around this time were expecting there was going to be a turn and maybe Roddy will do something to him, before all this. But I like the fact that they didn't do that, and they did throw us something that we don't normally get in the fact that they've done this. So that works for me. Good point here as well. March 16th in the Wrestling Observer. WrestleMania will also be the last booking for Hulk Hogan, and among the last for Roddy Piper, at least for a while, reports Meltzer. Hogan has mentioned earlier that he will leave after WrestleMania to do movies, and if he ever returns, it's a matter of it being all right and for him. Piper's last US appearance will be WrestleMania, but he'll stay on for a few weeks after to work the European tour. So, interesting times there, Matt. This is, of course, we've spoke about this many a times. This is where Hogan did want to bail out here, and he did want to go and do his movies, despite what we heard about Suburban Commando. He still really does rate himself that he's got a career there. But, I suppose it's a good run, Matt. 8 years worth, it's pretty decent. Do you feel like Hogan took a more realistic approach of his career, or do you think there was, Vince was overstepping it at this point, that people were like, here we go again, it's WrestleMania, it's got to be Hogan? How much mileage could they have got out of this match, or do you just think this just would have gone on and on at this point for Hulk Hogan in this sort of position? Because it's, I know we look at John Cena and we go, well, that guy, he's done even more than Hogan. And you look at Austin, he never made, as much as Cena. But back then, I guess the big difference that separates John Cena to Hogan is that Hogan started from the very beginning, when there really wasn't a number next to WrestleMania, that he really took it on his shoulders, and it was all about almost sort of the Hulkamania and that whole rise with the fans. It was slightly different, I suppose, and although it is a shorter span than John Cena's, could he have gone on a lot longer, Matt, or do you think it was always going to get stale? Or because it never seemed like it did get stale. That's the amazing thing, you know. Even when I look back at it, I'm thinking, boy, these fans loved Hulk Hogan. Do you think it could have ever got stale if he'd have stayed around for another, I don't know, 5 years after that?
No, I mean, it definitely seemed like it was the house that he built, and every time it rolled around, you kind of felt like he had to have a starring role in it because he was there right from the beginning.
Yeah.
I guess back then, you know, there wasn't a lot of other options. Like when you thought of wrestling, it was him and it was Ric Flair, and the fact that he was part of WWE meant that that's what you was going to get. That was him. He was WWE through and through, or at least at that time, that's what everyone thought.
Yeah, no, definitely. And yeah, it's interesting that he wants to bow out at this point, and obviously he thinks he's going to do the movies, as I've said before, and that's where he's going. But I don't know. I don't know how Vince would have looked at that, and he probably must have started panicking. And of course, this is where we get the whole. And again, you can go back on another timeline of the whole Luger stuff and all the rest of it. So, interesting times here, no doubt about that. But I want to go a little bit further now, and I want to read just before we head into WrestleMania here around this time, just another part of Bret's book here before we hit that. Just going to find that for us right now, and it's basically Bret talking about the painting, the picture he done for Hogan here. Bret says, I spent my 4 days off drawing a poster-sized montage of every WWF wrestler I could think of as a special send-off gift for Hulk. By all indications, he'd been riding into the sunset after WrestleMania, heading for Hollywood. I'm not sure quite that was going to happen, but with his reputation as a hero to the kids severely damaged and a ton of money in the bank, I didn't think he'd be back. Hogan off steroids would leave him looking much too mortal. To me, Hulk, like Vince, had taken the business to its highest peaks, and seeing Hulk fading out without any glory seemed wrong. So it's interesting that he done that, and he would like draw that picture for him. And I do remember he liked doing the art stuff and all those kind of things, that he done that for him. I do recall that story. But I guess despite Hogan and maybe the conflicts that Bret and him would have had politically, there was always that respect, Matt, that Hogan in many ways does put the food on the plate for a lot of the guys, and he's the reason the business is doing so well at that point. And even someone like Bret would acknowledge that, I guess, Matt, at that point.
Oh yeah, I mean that's undeniable, isn't it? I mean, you can't disregard that. I mean, like, it doesn't matter too much who's on top, even though you might have your own personal aspirations.
Yeah.
You've got to respect the fact that the company keeps on growing and growing year in, year out, and that can only be put down to the actual fact that someone is much more marketable than maybe perhaps you are. Yeah,
no, totally. Okay, well, as we go in, another fun fact here before WrestleMania, that the Tonight on Entertainment Tonight, on Thursday, did a WrestleMania plug. This was something that was sort of unheard of, I guess, at this time in America, that they did that. And also in Chicago, they did a house show just before sort of going in towards WrestleMania, where the Bushwhackers teamed up with Bret Hart to beat the Nasty Boys and the Mountie. Sounds like a fun match there, Matt, doesn't it? All that, really. March 30th now, 92. And this is interesting, because when we talk about tapings, this is kind of like how TNA do it today, but this tapings is sort of post WrestleMania. So they're taping for after WrestleMania. So, but obviously it's shot before WrestleMania. It's very confusing, but we spoke about that a few times. And Bret Hart is going up against Shawn Michaels in that. So it's a sort of sign of where he's going to go. Now, the night before WrestleMania,